The American epic war film, The SAND PEBBLES, premiered on December 20th, 1966, to outstanding reviews. It stars Steve McQueen, Richard Attenborough, Richard Crenna, and a very young Candice Bergen. It was both produced and directed by the Academy Award-winning director Robert Wise. The movie tells the story of both a fictional American gunboat, the USS San Pablo, that had the nickname the Sand Pebble, patrolling the Yangtze River during the 1920s, and the U.S. Navy machinist first class, Jake Hallman. He's tough and independent and also rebellious, and he's the ship's chief engineer, and this role is played by Steve McQueen. Hallman and his fellow sailors serving upon the USS San Pablo are known as the Sand Pebbles. They end up getting caught up in the political turmoil tearing China apart at the time. In 1962, former sailor turned writer Richard McKenna wrote his own experiences as an enlisted Navy man who was stationed in China for 22 years. That novel he produced was called The Sand Pebbles. He watched his 597-page mammoth work spend 28 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, becoming a Book of the Month selection and a feature in the Saturday Evening Post. In September of 1962, he received an offer of $300,000 for the movie rights. Sadly, though, McKenna died in November of 1964 before his story ever began to be filmed. Robert Wise had read the novel and wanted to produce a film that was based on it immediately. The movie rights for the novel had been sold initially to United Artists. A dispute over the budget and contractual terms soon evolved, and 20th Century Fox wound up getting the rights to the film. Executive Daryl Zanuck understood Weiss's desire to make the film, so he gave him the go-ahead on this project. Because of the extensive search for suitable filming locations and the large-scale pre-production work that would first be required, Weiss realized that it would be well over a year before principal photography could begin on the project. In addition, Robert Anderson's screenplay, which was as thick as a telephone book, would need to be condensed or possibly even rewritten. Weiss's first choice for the lead role of Jake Hallman was Paul Newman, and he turned the offer down. Pat Boone badly wanted the role, but Weiss wanted a real actor and not a singer-turned-actor for the part. In early 1963, Steve McQueen's name was mentioned for the first time for the leading role in this film, but he was rejected at first for not being a big enough name. Meanwhile, Weiss had talked 20th Century Fox into giving him The Sound of Music to direct, while the preliminaries for The Sand Pebbles was being addressed and worked out. William Wyler, who had been set to direct the musical, had a falling out with the studio, and Weiss was asked to take over the project. It took a little over a year and a half to make. Following the overwhelming critical and financial success of The Sound of Music, for which Weiss won an Oscar for Best Director, 20th Century Fox gave him the red carpet treatment. His success practically financed The Sand Pebbles and the $8 million budget that the film cost. Weiss could basically have anything that he wanted, and he took full advantage of the studio's generosity. No expense was spared in the shooting of the picture, using authentic Oriental locations in Taiwan and Hong Kong. The authenticity of the locale was a Robert Weiss production trademark. During that 18-month period, Steve McQueen had become a full-fledged star, too. Specifically, his leading role as Virgil Hiltz in The Great Escape. 20th Century Fox and Weiss were all for casting him in the lead role now. Weiss approached him with a salary of $650,000 plus a percentage of the profits. This was by far the most lucrative salary and prestigious role he had ever been offered. The director personally went to McQueen's hilltop estate, known as the Castle, marveling that the actor, in a single decade, had gone from being broke and hungry to living in a mansion on a hill. McQueen signed, but only after contract provision allowed his whole family to accompany him to the Orient. The relationship with his young co-star, Candice Bergen, off-screen was a somewhat cool one. Largely contributing to this, Steve, in a well-meant attempt to loosen her up, advised her to get it on with one of his stunt buddies. Leery of this proposition, 19-year-old Bergen chose to spend much of her free time with actor Richard Attenborough and his wife Sheila. Their relationship would grow even cooler some years later when Steve was to marry her best friend, Ally McGraw. 20th Century Fox spent $250,000 building a replica gunboat named the San Pablo in Hong Kong. At $250,000, it was the costliest prop ever built for a motion picture at the time. Weiss estimated the cost at $1 million if it had had to be constructed in the United States. Since the prop was actually powered by diesel engines, the black smoke that you see coming from the smokestacks came from old tires and other trash that they burned in a special compartment of the boat. The film was shot both in Taiwan and in Hong Kong. Then it was completed in Hollywood on the 20th Century Fox sound stages. Taiwan in 1965 was still technically at war with China. So for much of the time, the cast and crew were under military jurisdiction. Several of the filming locations were actually in military zones. Weiss, with his company of cast and crew and interpreters, began filming in November of 1965. 80 days had been assigned for the filming. Unforeseen delays and multiple problems soon erased that proposed schedule. It was replaced by 7 grueling months of shooting. Early on, while filming on the Keelung River in Taiwan, a 15-foot camera boat capsized, dumping the crew members and all the equipment into the water. A soundboard sank to the bottom of the river, setting back filming until a replacement could arrive from the U.S. Quite often, Steve McQueen and the director saw a scene being shot in completely different ways. Weiss came up with a solution for this, though. He would shoot the scene in both ways, a Weiss version and a McQueen version. This way of doing the filming prolonged the process and eventually added to the film's budget. And by the way, not one of the scenes that Steve insisted on made it into the final version of the film. Then there was the weather. Temperatures would range from in the 80s one day to in the 30s the next. Then came the rain, and then even more rain. The rain delays got so bad that Weiss had some of the interior sets in Hollywood dismantled and shipped to Taiwan. In addition to all this that happened, the production crew endured an earthquake, a hotel fire, and a 3-day riot by interested and disturbed bystanders. Finally, after 4 months in Taiwan, production was headed to Hong Kong, which was the light at the end of the tunnel for everybody. There was, however, a rather tense moment in Taiwan when the company was told that everyone was allowed to leave with the exception of Bob and Pat Weiss, Steve and his wife, and their children, and a couple of other key people. The government held their passports and claimed that the production company owed Taiwan more tax money. This was a complete lie, but the government was paid anyway. There was really no choice in the matter. It was a case of pay or stay. By the time filming was completed in Hong Kong, 3 draining months later, everyone, especially McQueen, was just absolutely exhausted. In May of 1966, after 7 months abroad, 4 months of delays, and $4 million over budget, the Sand Pebbles was completed. When the McQueen family safely landed on U.S. soil, Steve got out of the plane, got down on his hands and knees, and literally kissed the ground. Due to the exhaustion, he took his family to Alaska on a fishing vacation. And that wasn't enough, though. He actually had to leave the movie industry for an entire year to kind of regain his thoughts. Later on, he would confess that whatever sins that he had committed in his life, they had been paid for when he made this movie, The Sand Pebbles. The performance earned McQueen the only Academy Award nomination of his entire career. He was not seen on the big screen again until 1968 in The Thomas Crown Affair and Bullitt. The Sand Pebbles was a critical and commercial success. It became the fourth highest grossing film of 1966. The way the cast and crew struggled through a very difficult situation while making this film was completely amazing. This movie is definitely a film that's worth taking a look at. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.